On a quiet pre-weekend evening on Friday, the 23rd of January, United States Department of War released the National Defense Strategy 2026. India being an important strategic partner of the United States, it is relevant for New Delhi to study the National Defense Strategy and underline the priorities and perspectives on the same. Here, an attempt is made to do the same. As we know, recently the United States renamed the Department of Defense as Department of War, with President Donald Trump emphasizing that the US will employ its full military might to achieve its political objectives. Given the same, a study of the National Defense Strategy, which flows out from the National Security Strategy released in a few months back, remains relevant. The National Defense Strategy has outlined the strategic priorities of the United States, with many of the issues having debated extensively over the past years since President Trump took the reins in the White House in January 2025. Thus, these may not come as a surprise. Yes, the NDS is the basis on which the Trump administration is set to employ the military as a part of an extensive domestic and global agenda. The key points in the NDS have also been highlighted by us in our report at link given on the slide. From the Indian perspective, what are the key deductions? Firstly, India and the United States recently renewed their defense cooperation agreement for another 10 years in 2025. As one of the most important strategic partners of the US, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, the NDS is of considerable interest to India. While the United States National Security Strategy 2025 had outlined the priority of the Western Hemisphere and homeland defense for the United States, there was a sense that the Indo-Pacific and other theaters will be neglected. Yet, NDS 2026 clarifies that the Indo-Pacific will retain interest primarily due to growing strategic competition with China. This provides a degree of assurance to India and other allies and partners of the United States who are facing the ominous China land and maritime threats. As we well know, China has declared intention for continuing territorial sovereignty over areas such as Arunachal Pradesh, the Indian state. So we are well assured now that the Trump Monroe Doctrine, or Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which had restricted the United States interests primarily in the Western Hemisphere, does not imply so, and the Indo-Pacific has been, of course, given a priority, though second as such. What else is there for India in the National Defense Strategy? First, the US seeks defense burden sharing by allies and partners, which in concrete terms has been specified as an allocation for 5% for defense and security, of which 3.5% is expected for enhancing the core defense capability. India's defense allocations have been below 2%, given the debate on guns versus butter natural in a developing country. Will the Indian government increase allocations for defense to meet the US requirement for partners will be known on February 01, when the Union Finance Minister, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman, will present her budget. We do not expect a spike of more than 8 to 10% in the allocations to defense of approximately US $75 billion in 2025-26. This despite the fact that the Ministry of Defense in India has requested for 20% spike in the allocations from the previous year. The CRIN, or China, Russia, Iran and North Korea, so-called axis of evil, which had been defined as such by the George W. Bush administration in the first quarter of this century as the principal adversaries also has been mentioned in the NDS 2026 as states of concern, competitors as well as those with whom conflict can emerge. Of these, Russia and India are India's long-standing strategic partners. How the US relations progress with these, particularly Iran, which is facing an imminent second US military operation in as many years, remains to be seen. In fact, just a couple of days back, India sent a very strong strategic signal in voting against a resolution on Iran's human rights situation during the recent protests in the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. China, as far as China is concerned, the NDS declares that the US focus will mainly be in the Western Pacific. The US NDS 2026 identifies FIC or First Island Chain as a key defensive line for expansion and denial for the Chinese. India will have to be thus self-reliant to contest China's territorial expansion and forays in the Indo-Pacific, particularly the Indian Ocean region, on its own. Homeland security, there is a convergence of objectives in building homeland defense and security by the Trump administration as well as Modi government in India. President Trump's golden dome reflects Prime Minister Modi's Sudarshan Chakra, though the latter is far less expansive in terms of primarily land-based air, missile and drone defense assets, whereas President Trump's golden dome is a replica of what the erstwhile Star Wars was, but basically against multiple challenges emanating from ground and air. As far as defense industrial capabilities are concerned, the NDS 2026 wants to supercharge the US defense industrial base. India's emphasis on Atmanirbharta in defense has the same objective. However, there is a differential in terms of potential. While much of the US industrial base requires a rejuvenation, India is looking at establishing capabilities which are to be built from nascency. Will the US assist India in building defense industrial capabilities? There are many proposals which are floating, but with India-US relations in a relative slump for now, they appear to be moving at a very slow pace. In conclusion, we can say that there are many takeaways for India in the US NDS 2026, which need to be factored in defense budgeting, defense industrial capability building, and a realistic appraisal of the limits of US support vis-à-vis China. Finally, the crying need for India's national security strategy and defense being laid down and published remains.